Hello, welcome to the Weather Studio. I'm Aidan McGivern, a meteorologist right here at the Met Office headquarters in Exeter. And every week we bring you a live broadcast at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. This week, there's a lot to talk about. In the last 7 days, some very dramatic weather across the UK, and there's some potentially very severe weather in other parts of the globe over the next 7 days. And in the next 20 minutes or so, it's not necessarily a forecast. I'm going to be exploring the nuts and bolts behind the weather forecast, the ins and outs, the whys and wherefores. As ever, if you like what you see, you can press like, subscribe to make sure you don't miss these live broadcasts every Tuesday. And of course, you can send us your questions and your comments, and we will do our best to answer them. Now, normally, regular viewers may have noticed I would have a friend next to me, Alex Deacon or Claire Nazir. They're off doing other things today, but please don't worry, it's not going to be 20 minutes of me droning on. I have got other friends who are going to be talking about different aspects of the weather. First of all, I'd like to introduce Luke Mile, who is a media meteorologist here at the Met Office. And Luke's had a very busy weekend because the weather, well, we've seen all sorts of it, haven't we, during the last 7 days. Let's kick off with the heat at the end of last week. Yeah. Because on Thursday, that was when we got our top temperature, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So every day last week, we saw 30 degrees somewhere in the UK. But the peak was on Thursday. Faversham in Kent saw a high of 35.3 Celsius. Very hot conditions for the UK. And it's also worth noting that Faversham also saw the record back in 2003. So it's definitely a hot spot in the southeast there.
Yeah, its location obviously in the southeast. That's where you tend to get the hottest temperatures. And that heat then kicked off some incredible storms, didn't it?
It really did.
This is the satellite loop shown on the Met Office Twitter feed on Friday. And just watch, this is on a loop now, just watch as these incredible cumulonimbus clouds just bubble up out of nothing, out of thin air, sunny skies 1 minute, and then these incredible storms.
Yeah, it was a really quite rapid developing situation. In fact, viewers can see here these clouds just all of a sudden go from nothing to really big cumulonimbus clouds. They're just rapidly rising air, and we saw, you know, some very intense downpours under those clouds.
That's the view from space.
Yeah.
This is the view from below. Liam Ball sent us this on Twitter from Telford. Tell us what these are.
So this is Momatus cloud, and this forms when you've got rapid downdrafts of air coming out of the base of the cloud, and it creates this kind of very sort of globular look to the cloud. It looks quite threatening, actually. I think I'd be a little bit worried if I was standing beneath that, expecting to be rained on very immediately. yeah,
you'd often get a gust of wind, then a downpour of rain after you see this sort of cloud, Momatus cloud. And some places, these are incredible images, taken in Heslington, York, and this is on Friday as well. Annalise Emmons-Dean. These are hailstones. Just look at the size of these.
They're incredible, aren't they? I mean, we never really see this sort of phenomena in the UK. We're used to the very small pea-sized hail that we see regularly. But some of the shapes of these, I mean, you wouldn't want that hitting your car or your greenhouse at, any time.
No, and sometimes people are confused. How do hailstones fall when it can be so hot? But it's that heat energy that allows huge hailstones like these to develop, isn't it? Because when you get temperatures into the mid-30s down below, and then you get some moisture in the atmosphere, and then you get some cooler air coming in at high levels, well, that temperature difference allows these huge updrafts to develop, which helps to carry really heavy hailstones until they're bigger than £2 coins. And then they fall out the sky at 90 miles an hour.
And that's quite a scary thought, really, at the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, some of the shapes to these as well, you can see almost the way it's formed, and then it's just been pushed back down to surface. So, quite incredible.
So the heatwave ended with a bang, but there were further bangs, weren't there, on Saturday? This is a snapshot of what we saw in Northern Ireland. Thunderstorms on Saturday. What happened there?
So we basically had this pulse of thundery rain pushing up from the south, and it created a bit of a hook. And basically, because of that, we just continued to see heavy rain for several hours across parts of Northern Ireland. And that then led to a particularly wet day at Aldergrove in Northern Ireland, 98.8 millimetres of rain. in less than 24 hours. Their wettest day on record for that particular location. So, you know, some incredible weather. We've gone from heat, thunderstorms, and then this really intense rainfall as well.
Yes, of course we need the rainfall, but we don't need that much in that short space of time, do we? That can, of course, cause problems. So Aldergrove, the wettest place over the weekend, and after the rain, we had the wind.
We did, and for many of you, Sunday, you probably remember, was almost like switching to autumn. It was quite a wet and windy day, something we haven't really seen a lot of this summer. We saw some pretty strong gusts for Devon, 59 miles an hour there at Berry Head, but even areas where we're used to the strong winds in the winter, but not so much in the summer, and some pretty strong winds in the Western Isles as well.
It was quite a weekend, and you were working all the way through it. So
yes, it was a busy one, but interesting for a meteorologist.
Yes,
yeah,
very
absolutely.
busy. Well, thank you, Luke. I'll let you get
Thank
back
you very
to
much.
dealing with hopefully something a bit quieter.
A bit quieter for a few days yet. Thank you, Aidan.
Thank you, Luke. And of course, we've had some much-needed rainfall over the last few days, which will help, but perhaps we need more. The rainfall has been really lacking the first half of summer, and that's impacted not just humans, but our wildlife. And someone who can tell us more is Graham Madge. Welcome back to the Weather Studio.
Hello, Aidan.
Graham.
Good afternoon.
Graham is a senior press officer at the Met Office, also a wildlife expert, and you might remember him from an earlier edition of the Weather Studio talking about midges. We called that Madge's Midges, and this segment we're calling Madge's Moles, because the heatwave has impacted the moles in particular, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. So I think it's quite tempting to think that the lovely fine weather we've had, and many people have enjoyed it, and that the wildlife will enjoy it too. But of course we have to recognise that there are some species, like this mole here, that they survive by digging through soil, and for them to be able to do that using those very shovel-like front paws, they need soft earth. And of course what happens when you get very dry conditions, you get very hard-baked soil. That means that the prey that moles feed on, earthworms, their first reaction is to avoid drying out, so they go deeper into the soil, and that means that moles instantly find it very difficult to find food. And there have been quite widespread reports of moles being seen on the surface, and in fact I've seen one myself in the last month or so on my walk to work. So it is possibly people's first opportunity to see moles, because you only ever see them very, very infrequently. But sadly, that's not good news, because it means they're coming up above ground because they are short of food.
Yeah, and it's not good for the earthworms, I guess, because although they're out of harm's reach of the moles, they're going underground where there are fewer nutrients.
So to avoid stress, they go deeper into the soil horizon, and that means that it is very difficult for anything that preys on worms to actually get down that deep in order to find them. And it's not just moles that have been suffering. Hedgehogs. Now, hedgehogs, one of our most charming wildlife mammal visitors, sadly in huge decline already. So in the last 10 years, out of every 10 hedgehogs that we had 10 years ago, we now only have 6. So that's a remarkable rate of decline. And sadly, when you get extreme weather like this, then hedgehogs are one of the first casualties, because they need to feed on very soft-bodied food. So they're specialists in taking things like slugs and snails. And of course, those species are trying to protect the moisture in their bodies, so they quickly find shelter, and that means that the hedgehogs are struggling to find food. Wildlife hospitals are reporting many individuals coming in. Similarly with badgers. Badgers, one of their favourite foods is earthworms. Again, much more powerful digger, but they do like to dig for earthworms. Many viewers will be familiar with them ripping up lawns and things like that, so they're not always a gardener's friend. The reason they do that is to get the species that are in the soil to find food. So it is a challenge for some of our most loved wildlife.
Yeah, not just ground-based animals, but flying creatures as well.
Many people will be familiar with the song thrush, possibly not by sight, but more because of the anvils that they use. So these birds will have a favourite stone, perhaps in your back garden, and they will use that to break the shells of snails. They actually hammer the shells of the snails against the stone, and it becomes known as the anvil. You can see all the broken shells to know which ones they're using. But again, because of the fact that snails are finding the moisture anywhere they can, they're hiding out of harm's way, and of course that means that with song thrushes with babies to feed, we'll find it difficult. All of these species will survive. We're not talking about them necessarily dying out, but it will be a year of stress for them.
Yeah, and we've had quite a stressful few months with the snow, of course, and then the heat. I mean, all of these creatures are adapted to typical British weather, so anytime we stray, then there is stress, isn't there?
There is. I mean, look, going back to the beast from the east, we had extremely cold weather. I was doubtful that wrens would survive, one of our smallest bodied birds, and yet a week after the snow and the ice went, I heard several wrens singing in and around Exeter, so nature's remarkably resilient. Now, this is a ringlet butterfly, quite a familiar species across Britain, anywhere where you have grasses along hedgerows, scrubland, that sort of habitat. Now, in 1995, when we had the driest summer on record, our friends at Butterfly Conservation tell us that we lost half of the UK's ringlet butterfly population the following year. Now, that's not all necessarily down to the drought, but it does show that when you get an extreme period of weather, that our wildlife, as meteorologists, we're very familiar with barometers, but species can be natural barometers telling us what's happening with our climate, and they're very quick to respond.
And of course, before supercomputers and modern technology, we used to look to wildlife and to nature to tell us the weather forecast, didn't we?
Absolutely. So people have done that. The first swallow is a sign of summer. So nature's calendar has always been a long source of clues about what the weather is going to bring.
And the reason I mention that is because this is the first ever written newspaper weather forecast. It went out on the 1st of August, 1861. So the anniversary is tomorrow. It's not a significant anniversary. It's 157 years. But I thought you'd be interested in this, Graham, because, of course, you're a senior press officer here at the Met Office. And this is how it used to be. This is the weather forecast.
Fascinating to see it in that form. And, of course, the forecast is very important to people today. The importance of the forecast hasn't changed, but of course what has changed is the fact that we're able to, using digital technology, communicate with the public in real time, just as we're doing now, actually reaching people live with forecast or weather information.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to see it reported in that way. And of course, you know, the media team here has been inundated with calls about the heat and the lack of rain. And so we're hoping for a quiet spell so that hopefully the press office can just quieten down for a day or two.
We thought that when it snowed, and then we were almost immediately onto a heat wave. I mean, people are more interested than ever about the weather, but these actually were very popular when they started being published. And you'll see how little detail there is. These are all the place names, and you've just got a barometer reading there, temperatures, wind direction and cloud amount. And
but how exciting that must have been for the public to
when you
get
don't have anything,
when you've had nothing before.
Yeah.
That must have been an incredible leap forward, and will undoubtedly have saved lives. And
yeah, I mean, it was just a byproduct of forecasts for sailors and fishermen, because between 1855 and 1860 more than 7,000 lives were lost at sea. This depicts the sinking of the Royal Charter, and Vice Admiral Fitzroy thought there must be some way of forewarning people and started to devise these weather forecasts that were based on this new technology, telegraph readings of what the weather was doing in different places. So it was the first time they could actually get readings of the weather from afar and then devise their own weather forecasts. So the weather forecasts saved lives. Of course, it was based on very, very new technology, and so they weren't always correct. And but these were hugely popular when they started.
To have that insight must have just been hugely important. Of course, one thing is the fact that it would have taken time to get the information and to get it on the page and to get the newspapers delivered. So there would have been a lag, unfortunately, in that information getting out. And of course, today with supercomputers and satellites, we're able to forecast further out. But importantly, we're able to get that information out to people immediately so that they can take immediate benefit from it, look for warnings or whether it's going to be nice to visit the coast. So people can make their decisions and life choices with even better information that's pushed out further ahead, because we haven't got a lag in the system.
And
we can tell people
provide more detail. I like this. South. So this is the south of Britain. Fine. That's all it says, fine. And I guess some people might just like to hear that it's going to be fine. But we produce all sorts of forecasts, as you've mentioned, from 8-second clips that we put on Twitter to explore certain aspects of the weather, to these lives where we delve deeper into meteorology for 20 minutes or so and have expert guests like Graham and Luke on. And these are all the ways that you can follow us on social media to make sure that you don't miss any of our updates. But yes, thank you very much, Graham. I know you've had a very busy day again in the press office, but it was interesting to hear your expert analysis of the wildlife. So thank you, Graham. Yes, keep on sending your questions in. I know that we've had a few come in already. Now, Adtoons has asked, how far north will the warm weather reach later this week? Well, it will turn warmer across all parts of the country through the week. The hottest temperatures later this week and into the weekend will be across southern counties of England and South Wales. That's where temperatures are expected to reach the mid to high 20s and in one or two spots 30 degrees. Further north, it will turn warmer than it is at the moment and drier, but it won't quite get as hot as further south. So we're talking up to 20 degrees or so for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps low 20s and into northern England. So the hottest temperatures over the next few days will be in the south, nowhere near as extreme as some of the heat that we're expecting across the Iberian Peninsula, because we're expecting during the next few days some very hot air to be drawn up across the Iberian Peninsula from North Africa, exceptionally hot, and it could break records, local records or perhaps even European records. So it's certainly something we're keeping a close eye on here at the Met Office. Now, I've skipped forward to Friday there, and on Friday we can expect temperatures, if I just go back to that, Friday we can expect temperatures fairly widely across inland parts of Spain and Portugal into the 40s of Celsius, and in some places perhaps even higher than 45 degrees or so. Now, just for info, the Spanish and the Portuguese temperature records are around 47 degrees, so we could just beat that. And the European record, which was in Athens in Greece, that is 48 degrees, and even that is not out of the question that we could exceed that. So some exceptional heat over the Iberian Peninsula, which could have serious consequences on people there and on transport, tourists who aren't used to that kind of heat, and of course locals won't be used to these kinds of extreme temperatures. So certainly something to keep an eye on, the heat intensifying during Friday and into the weekend. Now, elsewhere across Europe, that hot air is likely to also extend into parts of France. And so, even in France, south of France, high 30s, perhaps 40 degrees in a few places. We've also had recently some very hot air over northern Europe, but that is likely to ease. And I had a question a moment ago from Gaza in Sweden. He said, will there be low pressure and cooler temperatures in Sweden next week? And it does look likely that temperatures will turn a little cooler across Scandinavia towards the end of this week and across northern UK as well. So we've seen temperatures in Lapland into the 30s during this summer at times, but some fresher air coming here by the weekend. But the big question, of course, through the week has been, will we get a taste of that Spanish heat? Because earlier in the week and through the weekend, some of the computer models were suggesting that we would see some influence from that very, very hot air from Spain. More recent computer model simulations have gone off that idea, and they bring that Spanish heat close, but not quite to the UK. And they have a different orientation for the high pressure that's expected to build in towards the end of this week. So through to the end of the week, what looks most likely is that high pressure will build across the UK. There'll still be a lot of cloud trapped under it across northern parts of the country, but across the south we'll see temperatures rising day by day simply because we'll have a lot of sunny spells and we'll be under this area of high pressure. That intense heat from Spain is less likely now to reach parts of the UK, but we're still likely to see into the weekend temperatures across southern parts of the country of around 30 or 31 degrees. So some increased heat for southern parts of the country into the weekend. But by the end of the weekend, fresher air starts to topple in across the rest of the UK. Always some uncertainty when you're talking about looking that far ahead in the forecast. So, of course, we'll keep you updated with our developments. We've got the 10-day trend to record and put out tomorrow. So we'll go into more detail about next week's weather tomorrow. Just time to answer one or two more questions. Talk amongst yourselves for a moment. It's not the best viewing when someone's looking for questions, but here's one from Dogs32. Do you think we'll see the second heatwave lasting a long time? Well, it looks likely to peak in terms of temperatures at the start of this weekend for southern parts of the country, and then some fresher air coming in after that. A lot of uncertainty as we go into next week in terms of the temperatures and the influence from high pressure and from low pressure. The main signals are that high pressure will influence our weather more than low pressure through next week, but certainly something that I'm going to be exploring in the 10-day trend tomorrow, because it does look interesting with a few conflicting signals for next week. So always uncertainty when you're looking ahead more than 5 to 7 days, but we will keep you updated on those developments. You can access the 10-day trend via our YouTube channel. We'll put it on our Facebook channel. And yes, once again, thank you for all your questions. If you've enjoyed watching this, click like, click subscribe so you don't miss any updates. We will be here this time next week, 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. But that's all I've got for you today. Thank you and goodbye.